Hello everyone, I'm Conquering History Games and welcome to the channel. Today is going to be, I think, my most ambitious video to date. And what I hope will be the start of a series of videos similar to this, if you all like it. I'm going to be going over several interesting historical characters in Crusader Kings 2. Now, any of you who have seen my Crusader Kings 2 campaigns know that whenever I start a campaign, I like to talk about, I always like to start as a certain historical character before we get too far into the alternate history, and I'll explain a little bit of their life story as well as that of the people around them. Because there are quite a few people who play Paradox Interactive games that they don't actually know the historical context of the worlds that they play in. And I find that it makes the experience more fun when you understand the characters. So I have a campaign that's coming up that is going to be taking place in the Alexiad start for Crusader Kings 2, which we're going to go in here to that bookmark. April 1st, 1081. And this is the first, I think the first campaign I've done that's actually at a bookmarked date instead of me going to a custom one. So I thought I would make as a separate video to cover my basis for all future 1081 starts, going over the interesting historical characters across the entire map. That does not mean I'm going to select every single nation here and give background to them, but we are going to be going over quite a few. So we'll start over here with Tordelbach and go into the game, and then I'll start working my way east, generally. Now, a couple things I want to bring up. The first is I am, for this video, only going to be discussing rulers, meaning people who are the top lead. They do not have a liege. So, for example, I would not go over Count Robert here, who is under King William the Conqueror. I would only talk about King William the Conqueror. If you all would like for me to do another video where I discuss, for lack of a better word, underlings in the nobility, and there are definitely tons of interesting ones. In fact, if anything, things get a lot more interesting when you find really obscure counts and things like that. I'd be happy to do it. Just please let me know. And if there's obviously it's going to take a lot of investment and research time, so if I see that there's a significant amount of people who want me to do that, I would be more than happy to. And also, because this is the first one and I eventually want to do all of the bookmark dates, please give me any sort of constructive criticism that you can, because I want to make this series of reference videos as good as possible, so that people can enjoy it and find interesting characters. And I hope that whether you're somebody who's new to Crusader Kings 2 or you're somebody who's been playing for a very long time, for years, like I have, that you'll find somebody in this video who is interesting to you and can reignite, some of the fun if you find that you're in a rut. Okay, enough, because let's get started. I have a long way to go. I have no idea how long this video is going to be. So the first one we're going to talk about is King Tordelbach of Mumu. He is the King of Munster and virtually the King of Ireland at this time period, mostly due to the alliances that he had created across the island. I actually did once do a campaign where I played as his grandson, also called Tordelbach. You should check that out. That one was pretty fun. He's the one who has the famous cross that he had commissioned. Now, part of King Tordelbach's appeal as well, he has a historical bloodline. He's part of the blood of Brian, which basically all of the Mumu leaders are going to have anytime you come into Crusader Kings 2. So he's descended from Brian O'Brien, an Irish king of legend. He has managed to unify the warring leaders of Ireland in the Viking occupation of the Isle. So by playing as him, first off, it's relatively safe because you have 3 sons, so you're not going to have an heir issue, which is good because you're already 72 years old. But it's going to allow you to have Tanistry succession, as well as additional monthly prestige, more combat skill, and more Irish opinion in general. Now, historically, he also virtually chose the kings of Konatka. Incidentally, I'm going to be mispronouncing things all over the place because I tend to read this stuff. I'm not listening to like a lecture on it. And it is in fact his grandson who will eventually be the king of Connacht, who is that's who I played. So it's King Torbok of Connacht. So of all the Irish people here, he's a pretty interesting one. Although there is somebody else, if you're looking for somebody who's in a less powerful position, because you can see he already owns a decent chunk of the Torbok already owns a decent chunk of Ireland. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 counties, so that's a pretty good start. Obviously, he can take Dishumane pretty fast as well. But over here we've got Earl Donchad of Langan. So he's pretty old too. He's 59 years old and had already been through wars against Tortlebach. When he was younger, when Tortlebach seized Dublin, right here, Donchad was one of his prisoners, and along with his brothers and his father. And so they lost that piece of land, and so the only thing they have left is this one county down here. Now, after Tortlebach died, historically, then Donchad here took Dublin back, and then ended up in a war with Tortlebach's son, Muirchertach Mac Tortlebach, over Dublin. So if you want to do a revenge campaign, Earl Donchad here is going to be a little bit harder, and but it's an interesting one, since you'll have a natural rival waiting for you on the other side of the island, so you guys can fight over who will rule. All right, and of course these characters that I'm going through, they're going to have varying degrees of difficulty. All right, moving up north, we have here the King Gudred or Gudrod of Sorier. He is the founder of the Crovan Dynasty that rules these islands and bits of modern-day Scotland. This is basically the Kingdom of the Isles. He is Norwegian, you will notice. He is descended from Ragnar Lodbrok, who has become very famous since there's that Viking TV show, which incidentally I have not seen, even though I've heard good things about. So he, if anytime you're playing a character that has his blood, you can raid yourself to some kind of kingdom at least, so that's always a good start. Now, King Gudrid here, you'll notice it's the year 1081. This is post William the Conqueror taking over England. But King Gudrid had actually participated in the invasion by Harald Sigurdsson, Harald Hardrada, when he had invaded England in 1066 in an attempt to establish himself as king. So he would have been, let's see, minus 14 years. He would have been a teenager at the time, but he still participated in it. So after the failed invasion and the Battle of Stirling Bridge, it gets a little bit hard to track Gudrid. There's different accounts. So, for example, there's one account that has him sheltering with Godfred Mac Stitruk, who was the king of Dublin at the time. But the thing is, Godfred Mac Sturtrid, we have other accounts that say that he died in 951, so somehow this guy was still alive over 110 years later to give shelter to Gudrid. So it's possible that instead this Godfred Mac Stigtruk was a distant cousin who also went by the name Godfred da Ragnarok. But in any case, whoever it was that he was sheltering with after the failed invasion, they ended up conquering the island of Man. So you'll see that has been incorporated into the kingdom here. So, him and his cousin probably had a shared ancestor in Amlan Chada, who was somebody who had been a king. He was another Norwegian who had been king of both Dublin and Northumbria over here in England. Other things that he was doing in this time before he became king was that he aided King Gofried II of Gawain, who probably was also another cousin, secure a lot of his holdings. So you'll see here that his petty kingdom is actually rather strong. It's actually bigger than this because he is suzerain to King Rias of de Huthabarth, so he actually owns a pretty nice chunk of Wales right now. His cousin does, and that's in part due to Gudrid. Now, his grandfather you'll see here, was Ivar of Dublin. He actually did hold the county for a time. So that could be a goal in this campaign, is you could try to take back Dublin for your family, maybe try to get into Northumbria and eventually turn it into a huge Britannic. It's really interesting. And historically, Gudrid did take Dublin in 1091, but he was pushed out by son of King Torlbach, Murtshatak, as well. So this guy, so Dublin was switching hands a fair amount during this time period. Another interesting thing about him being the founder of the Crovan dynasty is they actually were the rulers of these isles continuously all the way until the 1266 Treaty of Perth, when Norway transferred these lands over to Scotland. So he's a really kind of more unique character to play as. What with his bloodline, he's Norwegian and Catholic. He has these interesting ties to both Ireland and England and Wales. So I think he's a perfect candidate for you to make the argument that I should rule Britannica. I have all of the I've got all the correct blood, all the correct ties to do so. So he's pretty cool. All right, moving down to Wales. Don't worry, we're not going to skip Scotland. Let's check out King Justian or Istian of the Morganwig dynasty. Now, the Morganwig dynasty stretches back very, very far, all the way back to Tudrig, also known as Theodoricus, who was the king of one of the post-Roman Christian kingdoms. So when Rome fell, when they abandoned the island, there were kingdoms that filled that power vacuum. And Tudrig died after he had abdicated the throne to become a hermit. He was extremely religious. I think he is Saint Tudrig in some denominations of Christianity. But he came back from his life as a hermit to fight the Saxons who were invading England. Then he died. And that's how you become Saint Tudrig. So, what's interesting is, if you take this bookmark, you're starting on April 1st, 1081, which is the feast day of Saint Tudrig. I can think of nothing more blessed. So, the idea here is that, can you restore this over 500-year-old family back to glory? As you can see, you only own these two counties here at the start of the game. And historically, they were defeated by Robert Fitz Hammond, who was a Norman in the court of William the Conqueror, and I believe he actually is in here somewhere. Robert Fitz Hammond. I bet I can find him. Robert Fitz Hammond. You know what? I'm sure he's here. I don't have to look for him specifically. I looked on my own time. He's in here somewhere. So that's one of those little details that I like about Medieval 2. And that's not a ruler, so we shouldn't talk about him anyway. So, can you restore this dynasty to glory? At least you have an heir, right? Alright, coming back up here, we have King in Scotland. Scotland is at the time being ruled by King Malcolm III, also known as Malcolm Canmore, which is basically the Great. He ruled Scotland for 35 years and was a key factor in it remaining independent from England. He's probably most important in terms of the history of the Isles as being a patriarch to other famous people. So, for example, he had his family unified with the family of King William the Conqueror when he married his daughter Edith, aka Matilda. Where is she? Yeah, she's right here. She's 2 years old at the time. So marrying her to the future King Henry I, who also should have been born. Yeah, he's over here. He's 12. Will become King of England one day, even though there are several sons in front of him to his father. He also married another daughter to... where is he? Yeah, here we go. Count Eustace of Boulogne. Not this one. He was to Eustace III. I believe this is Eustace I. And his youngest... So he had these different alliances here, to help keep Scotland free. He also... his youngest son, Prince David, and you'll notice he has quite a lot of sons, and many of them would be king, but his youngest son, David, would eventually become king, and he launches the Davidian Revolution, which did several things, such as feudalizing Scotland. He instituted the reforms of Pope Gregorius VII, who is in power here. We see he's 59, but there he is. He established sheriffs. He stimulated the economy, and Anglo-Normanized the Scotland in many ways. So it's kind of interesting because you have King Malcolm here, and then you've got Prince David, who's just been born, basically, just barely over a year old. So you could try to set that up. I don't know how you're going to kill your own kids, though, but you can figure something out. You're smart. Now, King Malcolm's another famous one is his wife, Queen Margaret of Scotland. She would eventually become Saint Margaret. Now, by the way, you might be thinking, you're only talking about Malcolm's family. Well, Malcolm is, in fact, the Malcolm from Macbeth. The son of King Duncan, and there's his brother Duncan as well, brother Donald, I should say. And this is kind of fun. If you click here, south of Goriath, which is your capital, basically, there is Duff of Fife. Macduff. He's still alive. He's 53 years old. He's on his second wife now. Poor dude. So if you want to play a Shakespearean character, there he is. Post-death of Macbeth, of course. All right. Now let's head south. Talk about the elephant on the aisle. King William the Conqueror of England. He's older now. He's 54 years old. The conquest happened 15 years earlier. And at this point in time, he is spending a lot of time dealing with constant rebellion. Now, anybody who's played Crusader Kings 2 and the first thing you did as William the Conqueror is, throw that Norman yoke on English neck, or however the saying goes, you know that you have to deal with rebellions by the locals. And that is what William ended up spending quite a lot of his years after he became king doing. So this is after he's already done the harrowing of the North, which is when a rebellion happened in the North, and he went and he killed so many people that it actually permanently affected the population demographics of the region up until basically the Victorian era of the 19th century. But what's going to happen pretty soon, if we look over here, there's Prince Bishop William II of Durham. He's a Norman. There's going to be a rebellion, and he's going to be assassinated, murdered, and then King William is going to have to harrow the North again, because how many times do we have to teach you this lesson, Northumbria? But there were also other issues he had to deal with down here in France. Mainz was rising up against him. Also, in terms of other characters, we have here Count Odo of Kent, his half-brother. I believe they have the same mother. Yeah, same mother here. Hervela de Falais, who he's gonna end up being imprisoned by William because he tried to assemble a lot of vassals together, claiming that he was doing it because he was going to try to go and take lands in Italy, but it's not a good look when your half-brother is starting to assemble an army and he hasn't asked you permission to do so. Another thing that William was doing during this time is he was preparing to stop an invasion by King Knut IV of Denmark, who has... Not in the game. I'll talk about him in a little bit, but basically he was going to try to take the throne of England. That invasion ended up fizzling out, so William did not have to defend against him, but you never know what could happen. So playing William, yeah, you already are starting in a pretty good position where you're the King of England and you own Normandy, and you're in probably the best position to become Emperor of Britannica. By the way, don't forget, you've already got the bloodline founded here, giving you bonuses for Norman English bastard opinion. You can also legitimize bastards for free if you want to go that route. But you have to watch out for rebellion. But it is an interesting historical way to play, especially if your kids all start dying and then you end up with your 12-year-old Henry here as your heir. Alright, gonna move south now. Let's check out King Philip of France. So there's not much to say about this particular Capet. He was a long-reigning king, but he was very weak. His son was weak, and his grandson was weak too. And so this is really at a point in French history where they are just going to start falling apart. This is where the English are going to be, coming in and starting to take more of what is now mainland France. And so generations of... So basically, if you're going to play as King Philip, You're in a pretty decent position, as you can see. Obviously, you're not as strong as the Holy Roman Empire, but you do own quite a bit of land. And just try to see if you could prevent the decline. Incidentally, if you want to see me reverse that decline, I do have a campaign where I played as this Philip's his great-grandson, Philip II, aka Philip Augustus, and I restored France to greatness, and that's an amazing campaign. If I do say so myself, I was very pleased with it, and there is some hilarity that ensues at the in the very first episode, so you should check it out if nothing else for that. Alright, moving east. By the way, I'm going to be zigzagging, don't worry, I'm not forgetting Iberia, so we're going to be going in a weird direction sometimes. Alright, let's move over here and actually talk about the Emperor. Kaiser Heinrich IV of the Holy Roman Empire, of course, of House Salian, as they pretty much always are. So, this particular Kaiser was interesting. At various points in his life, he personally held, because it's a feudal system. So, if you go over here, for example, and look at Philip, you look at Philip, he personally owns Paris, Orleans, Senlis, and Vexien. I'm talking about personal holdings right now of Heinrich. He had been, during his lifetime, he had held Bavaria, Germany. He was king of Germany, king of Italy, king of Burgundy, and of course, as we see now, he was the empire of the Holy Roman Empire, triggering the hell out of Voltaire. So, one of the more interesting things about him was, it's one of the things that usually will make a Holy Roman Emperor very interesting, is he got excommunicated by the Pope. Interesting does not mean unique. But the reason for this is because he had been appointing bishops personally, and had... Excuse me, I'm just going to turn the music up a tiny bit. Okay, so the reason for this is that he had personally been selecting bishops, and he had all the bishops of Germany declare that the Pope's election was invalid, and because of that, of course, Pope Gregorius excommunicated him. Now, the reason why he had the Pope's election declared invalid was because he did not agree with a lot of the reforms that Pope Gregory was doing. I referenced these earlier when we were talking about Scotland and the Davidian Revolution. But one of these reforms was that local leaders could not invest the bishops themselves. So this is basically like if you go into the religion, excuse me, not the religion, but you go into the where is it? Oh yeah, they don't have them here, but where you could decide free investiture versus papal investiture. Gregorius was trying to implement papal investiture, and Heinrich or Henry, depending on who you ask, was not down with that. So Heinrich now found himself in a difficult position because he was excommunicated. And so he went to do penance to the Pope. He dressed in a hair shirt and walked all the way in the middle of July to where the Pope was staying at the time, in this castle. The Pope left him outside the castle and would not let him in for 3 days until eventually he brought him in to absolve him. Now, this is called the Walk of Consata, I think it was. The Walk of Consata, or the Humiliation of Consata, depending on who, or Conasa, I think that was it. Depending on who you ask. So some people say it's a humiliating move, where the emperor was debasing himself before the Pope in this way. Others say that this was a really clever political maneuver, because there was so much fanfare around this event of him humbling himself so much before the Pope that the Pope had no choice but to absolve him. There's some interesting vassals who get involved here, but again, that's for a vassal video if you want to see that sometime. And so Heinrich's legacy ends up being pretty mixed, but one of the things I think is kind of fascinating is that he becomes this heroic figure during the Protestant Reformation because he's seen as a symbol of defiance against the Pope. But that's sort of strange because he ends up debasing himself before the Pope. But his whole idea that he wanted free investiture, I guess, it's the rebellion against the Pope. If you rebelled against the Pope, the Protestants loved you during the Reformation. All right, moving on. Let's head up north now. We've got King Knut of Denmark, also known, or Knut. I know him as Knut. First thing, Blood of Ragnar, of course. So he's also known as Knut the Holy or Saint Knut. He had many, many siblings. As you can see here, the Estreds were a prolific bunch, creating many princes and queens and kings and whatnot. So this is where the family tree. You got to keep up with me, everybody. So his father's mother was the sister of King Knut the Great of England. Now, he was the famous king of, also Blood of Ragnar, of course, the king of Norway, Denmark, and England. He's basically the height of Scandinavian authority over the Isles. And so, because he was the great-nephew of Knut the Great, he felt that this gave him a claim on England. Of course, the way the Crusader Kings 2 mechanics work, they do not agree. But that's fine. You can work it out. You're a smart guy or girl. So he had been spending a lot of King William's reign raiding England already. So he'd already made several trips over there. Now, before I get more into that, he was very friendly to the church. Possibly this was for devout reasons, but it also could have been that he wanted to have the Pope and just the church as a whole as a friend. So he would gift a lot to the church. He'd gift them land. He made it a part of his administration to collect tithes for them. Now, he was going to attack England, as I said earlier, but he ended up getting distracted because Heinrich IV here was going to invade Denmark, so he canceled the invasion so that he can keep his soldiers home. Now, that attack ended up not going through either. But then the next year, when he was going to resume the revolt against England, the attack against England, there was a peasant revolt. I can't find the reason why there was possible. If I had to guess, because it seems that he was killed inside of a church. Maybe it was a religious thing, may have been pagan related, but in any event, he does get killed during that peasant revolt, and so he never ends up invading England. Maybe you can try to do it for him. Alright, moving north, now we come to King Inge of Sweden. Now this is an interesting guy. Drinking game, say every time I say interesting, drink. He is said to have been a devout Christian. We don't actually know a whole lot about him. Sources are varied and vague at times. But one thing that seems to be agreed upon is that at some point he was forced to abdicate because he refused to perform the blot, which is basically the sacrifices to the Norse gods. Now you'll notice that he is Christian. The previous kings were Christian, they were Catholic, but this was still something that the kings of Sweden would do. Now, the issue is, if you come over here, you look, you see Germanic pagan, Germanic pagan, Germanic pagan. He's a Catholic king, but he still has pagan people in his country at the time. So by not performing those sacrifices to the Norse gods, he ends up being forced to abdicate. So he leaves, he manages to assemble a new army, and he retakes his throne from Haka. Now, if we actually go over here to the history, Hakan here of Sweden, this was who he overthrew. It says, I don't know why, and it's just a small detail, but it's not a big deal, but they often will have people put down as natural deaths when they very much were not. But so Hakan here, this is also a mistake. They have him as, or actually no, he was Christian, but the thing was that he would perform the sacrifices. So he became known as Hakan Blot Swain because he would still do the sacrifices to the pagan gods. But anyway, so Ingen defeated him and took his throne back. He then proceeded to continue to Christianize the country. He opened, for example, the first nunnery in Sweden. And he was not really a warmonger, and he was a peacemonger. He would use his children as for marriage alliances. So, for example, he married into the Grand Duchy of Kiev. He married his family into Norway, into Denmark, and those are the major powers around him, of course. So he was a peaceful ruler. So perhaps you can do the same, or perhaps you can violently, bring Christianity back up here into the northern reaches of Sweden. All right. And finally, to finish out the big three, we have King Olav III of Norway. So he is the son of Harald Hardrade. He was at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, did not participate in it though. He has the blood of Harald Fairhair, a legendary ruler who through skill and military might united the kingdom of Norway and the people therein. So it's going to increase his personal combat skill, his Norwegian opinion, Norse opinion, and attractive opinion. Although his personal combat skill is not that great. That's what happens when you're charitable, kind, and slothful. Anyway, he has quite a father, figure to look up to. You'd think that this would be a bloodline, but it's fine. I guess they didn't want to make him OP and double up on too many bloodlines. Anyway, so when he was at Stirling Bridge, but he did not participate. He was because he was still a child at the time. Would have been 16, I think, just had turned 16, and so he watched the battle from a ship. And I guess it had quite an impact on his mental state because his kingship was well known for being one of peace, focusing on domestic improvement. When he was going to be invaded by Knut IV of Denmark here, he stopped him with a marriage alliance instead. So you can play that way, or you can instead to disregard these traits and choose the path of violence and take it to everybody who tries to mess with you and try to be King of England. It's quite the crown jewel of Europe, just as India would be England's jewel. So that, I think, is going to wrap it up for Scandinavia. Now we're going to move from the Scandinavian peninsula over here to the Iberian one. And of course we have to start with King Alfonso VI, the Brave, of Castile of the Jimena family. So this is this is a point where he's actually holding 3 crowns. If you've played Crusader Kings 2, you know that often these Christian kingdoms will be split up. But he currently owns the Kingdom of Castile, Leon, and Galicia. No Portugal in sight right now. So probably his most important thing that he did was that he would end up taking Toledo from the Muslims, and he would declare himself the emperor of all Hispania, the entire peninsula, basically. He was taking advantage of a divided Muslim half of the peninsula. As you can see here, it just looks like a bunch of green checkers, right? So this is the power vacuum that is going to get filled, and I'll talk about how it gets filled in a little bit. And he's taking advantage of it. Now, one of the things that's interesting here is actually if you go into his court, you will find Rodrigo de Vivar, aka Rodrigo Diaz, aka El Cid himself. This is right before Alfonso is going to eject him from the kingdom, and then he's going to go try to work for Duke Ramon here, who's a twin, and these twins own even some what do you call these Burgundy lands, between France and Italy, these areas around the Alps, and then they will reject him, and that's when El Cid says, okay, so the Christians don't want me, time to go hang out with the Muslims then. Now, the other thing that he was known for besides taking Toledo, which he established as the new capital, was that he would fend off the Almoravid invasion, which I'm going to talk about more in a bit. But he's a pretty strong, he's a decent ruler if you want to have a good Iberia campaign. Obviously, he's in a much stronger position than Sancho of Aragon over here. Now, speaking of the Almoravids, let's talk about them. So they're down here in Africa at the time. These are one of the dynasties that would end up ruling southern Iberia, the Muslim sections of it, after the collapse of the Umayyads. So this is Sultan Youssef of the Almoravid Sultanate. He's, as I was just saying, he's in Africa right now, but historically what ends up happening is after Alfonso takes Toledo, all of these Muslim kingdoms start to go into a panic, and they ask the Almoravids, who have been getting stronger and stronger, to come over and help them. This is kind of funny and ironic because the way that the Muslims originally entered Iberia was when they were invited over to help with internal disputes, and then the Muslims just said, oh, I'll take your whole stock, right? That's the joke, right? And so they end up taking most of the peninsula, and so that's exactly what's going to happen with the Almoravids. They are going to go to war with Castile, and they are going to take back all the land that Alfonso takes, except for Toledo itself. But what they really end up doing is gobbling up all these smaller Muslim kingdoms, and theirs is a much harsher brand, a much more fundamentalist brand of Islam than the more cosmopolitan Umayyads had been that had ruled up here. Also, you'll check his bloodline. He is the founder of the blood of Youssef, giving additional piety and personal combat skill, more Andalusian opinion, even though, which is interesting because he's a Berber, but I guess that's to tie into how they were hoping, hey, come help us, you're strong. Yeah, he was invited by the emirs of Andalusia to come to Iberia and stop the Christian onslaught. He won and established a vast realm extending from Ghana to Toledo, meaning that those were outside of his borders. Incidentally, I'm not going to talk about Africa here, because there's not much in the way of rulers, but if we want to talk about vassals, there's some interesting stuff down there. So I'm really pushing you guys. Come on, tell me if you want me to do the vassal video. I'm so ready to do it, but I don't want to do it if it's only going to get 10 views. So anyway, yeah. So that's Youssef. I'm just checking my notes here. So that's Youssef of the Almoravids. So there is one of these minor Muslim kingdoms I want to bring up, and this is the Aghlabid Emirate here. So you may have heard of these guys, but not in the context of them being around Iberia. Now, this Aghlabid Emirate actually used to be over here in Egypt, and they were the ones who the Fatimids overthrew in 909, and now they're hanging on these bunch of rocks sticking out of the Mediterranean, known as the Balearic Isles. So this could be, if you want a difficult Muslim game, something really interesting, try to take Egypt back. Good luck. Now, we're moving into the central Mediterranean now, and we're going to talk about one of the more colorful characters of this time period, Duke Robert the Fox of Apulia. I always personally heard him referred to as the Weasel, but that perhaps might have been biases from certain accounts. Now, he's a really famous Norman and adventurer. His father was a mercenary. There were a lot of... Because he's a Norman, they're basically Vikings. So his father had been a mercenary who fought with the Lombards, back when there still were Lombards, against the Byzantine Empire. Remember, the Byzantines held a lot of southern Italy for a time here. Now, he himself became essentially a robber baron, and there's a lot of mixed descriptions of his time there. So obviously there's a lot of scorn being heaped on him during this time, but there's also a lot of just conflicting accounts in terms of even his physical description. So sometimes they'd say, oh, he was really big and wide, and others say, no, he's very slim and lithe. There's accounts that his eyes could shoot fire, and that his shout was so vigorous that he could make 10,000 men flee from the sound of it. And during his long military career in Italy, he would fight the Pope, he would fight the Venetians, he would fight Germans, and a lot more. And he ends up carving out a kingdom for himself out of Sicily and southern Italy with the aid of his brother Roger. So he's probably most important in terms of culturally for being the one who brings Catholicism to southern Italy. This is a little bit after the schism has happened. Of course, this was quite Orthodox here, and as you can see, there is still some Orthodoxy hanging on at this time. But he's the one who brings Catholicism to there. Speaking of Catholicism, so Robert here was actually once excommunicated, but then Pope Gregorius here was being besieged in a castle, and then he went and defeated the army and rescued him, and so Gregory absolved him for this, and also he was very supportive of Gregory's reforms. In fact, Dante, the one who wrote the Divine Comedy, he actually includes Robert in the pantheon of the warriors of faith. Don't ask the Byzantines how they would have felt about that. Now, moving a little bit south, we just discussed him a little bit. There's Duke Roger of Sicily, the brother. So he eventually would conquer all of Sicily. When the game starts here, as you can see, there's still Muslims hanging out on the island down here in Syracuse, for example. But he eventually would conquer all of this, and even leap over and take Malta down here from the Berbers. So his kingdom of Sicily and the one of Apulia would eventually fuse together and form the kingdom of Sicily. So you could pick really either one of these. It just depends on how you want to play it. But you know, you could try to just get all this together, and heck, maybe even take the war even further south, go into North Africa, and see what you can carve out there. All right, now we're gonna hop over the sea here, and we're gonna check out King Dmitar Zvonimir of Croatia. He is the last of the so-called native kings of Croatia. This is interpreted in different ways. It's usually meaning that he's the last king of Croatia that actually ruled all of Croatia. He had come to the throne initially due to the blessings of Pope Gregorius. Very busy pope, this one. And anyway, he'd come there because the kingdom of Croatia had been disputed for over a decade. This was originally actually caused by Heinrich IV, who had invaded southeast here into the Balkans, and it was just creating chaos. So Croatia had not had a real king for like 10 years, over 10 years. And you'll see here, he's in fact crowned by Pope Gregorius VII. Now, he one of the conditions, of course, was that he aided in the reforms of Pope Gregorius within Croatia. He also helped out Robert the Fox, Robert the Weasel, whatever you want to call him, down here, in a lot of his conquests. Oh my gosh, I actually completely forgot to talk about, Duchess Shiligaita, who was... you know, she was pretty famous in her own right as a warrior, and she would like wear armor often. And in fact, there is an account that they were fighting a battle against the Byzantines, and she's the one who led the charge that took the battle back into their favor. And I think there was some nice detail here. They've given her skilled tactician, siege leader, strong, brave, proud, zealous, wroth. Very nice attention to detail there. So hey, maybe you can try to find a way to, you know, play as her or something. Anyway, coming back over here to the King of Croatia. Sorry about that digression. Yeah, I was just saying he helped him out because, of course, the Byzantines were his enemies. He also is the founder of a bloodline. So you're going to get a little more prestige and some Croatian opinion. And as it says here, peaceful ruler who rose to kingship through skilled diplomacy. His rule saw huge economic and cultural advances take place in Croatia. So you've got that going for you. Now, moving a little bit to the northeast is one of the perpetual enemies, it seems, of Croatia. We have the Hungarians here, under King Arpad Laszlo of Hungary, aka Saint Ladislaus. He actually starts with two bloodlines, as you'll see here. He has the blood of Attila, additional prestige, combat skill, Bulgarian opinion, horse archer morale goes up, and children can be mercenaries. Kubrat, this is from Dulo. I'll talk just a tiny bit more about him later, but Kubrat, it claims descendants from Attila, one of the most feared enemies of ancient Rome, who united numerous tribal clans under his banner. And he also has the blood of Arpad, the Kendi, sacred ruler of the Magyar tribes. He went on to conquer the Carpathian Basin, making a new home for the Hungarian people, because of course they came from the east, like many other people. So more ambitious opinion, Hungarian opinion, prestige, combat skill, and whatnot. So starting with two, that's not too bad. We're gonna now, just like Croatia had been having trouble, so had Hungary before the rise of Ladislaus. But for decades, not just about 10 years, it's been going on for decades, at least since the 1060s, maybe even since the 1030s, because there's just different reckonings, different accountings of who was really in charge and how much control did they really have over Hungary. You know, when, you know, can it really be said that a king controls Hungary, for example, if you know, he's put there by the Holy Roman Emperor? So, a big part of Laszlo's here's administration was, or I guess you could say, an example of his character. You'll also notice he's a holy warrior here, but he also refused to be crowned at first, because he said that he wanted a heavenly crown, not an earthly one. Of course, he did eventually get crowned, so that's good for you as a CK2 player, so you're not getting the negative traits because of that. But he started to create a lot of new laws in Hungary, and they were really ranging. It was very broad, very comprehensive. It ranged from criminal punishment to protecting property rights, to even things like, you got to make money too. So he created a complete royal monopoly on the salt trade. Of course, salt being very important, especially in the Middle Ages. Thieves were to be hanged. There were a lot of crimes that led to being blinded, although a lot of this was still steeped in religion. So, for example, if you committed a crime, but if you took sanctuary in the church, that wasn't enough. You'd still be punished for your crime, but your punishment would at least be lessened because you took sanctuary in that church. Now, his wife was Queen Adelaide here. Speaking of the Holy Roman Empire, her father was Duke Rudolf of Swabia, who was an attempted alternate king that was made to Heinrich IV. This was for a lot of reasons, the main one, though, being that Heinrich had been excommunicated, so people were looking for a different king who was still in with the Pope. Other things that our future saint here did was he expanded out. He established a lot of monasteries in his kingdom. He fought off the Pechenegs. He married his sister to the king of Croatia, as you'll see here. So Queen Arpad, you'll see she's Hungarian. And then you go to siblings, and there he is. It's all interconnected, He also fought off the Kumani, who right now are, the Pechenegs are in the way, but they're going to end up coming west in the 1090s. There's evidence that they were paid off to attack him because he was expanding so much, but there doesn't seem to be a consensus as to who bribed them. Some say it was the Byzantines, some say it was the emperor. It's a lot. It's a kind of all over the place. He also even invaded Poland at one point to force this king, Władysław, to legitimize one of his sons. Of course, he's only got the one right now, who's 8 years old, but it was to a different son. So he basically chose the future king of Poland as well. And in the last year of his life, allegedly, the kings from all over Europe came to him at Easter and were asking him to lead a crusade against the Turks. But then he died shortly thereafter, so it never really materialized. But I think it says something that whether this story is true or not, but it says something about him, that there's even this idea that of all the kings in Europe, they would have gone to him to lead this crusade, and so that's how you become saint, baby. All right, we're gonna move up north now here. We're gonna check out Kievan Rus, which is pretty damn big right now because they have a lot of he's suzerain to a lot of people, and this is King Vsevolod of Kievan Rus. So he's just become the Grand Prince of Kiev. He is also a descendant of Rurik, which is going to give you additional prestige, more Eastern Slavic opinion. The founder of the Rukid dynasty, he was a Varangian chieftain who ruled over the Rus and built several settlements, the most famous of which lies in Novgorod. Now, this bloodline of Rurik would actually rule Kievan Rus for centuries, basically until Ivan the Terrible fucks everything up. Now, what's kind of sad about this guy's life is if you look at his siblings, he's got 8 and they're all dead. Just so sad. He spent most of his life fighting the Kumani. So he's it's a really strong, interesting Kievan Rus here. Could be a good candidate for what's that achievement? Getting that achievement where like you're Russia and Pravada something or other. I'm forgetting the name right now. So sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up if I wouldn't remember the name. And then, by the way, I'm not going to go over the traits of all of these characters, obviously, because this video we're already past the 45-minute mark. But always check these ones out too. So he has underneath him, I guess I should go through them. He's got Polotsk, Kievan Rus. Yeah, just these different, princedoms out here. So, like, Smolensk, for example. He's got a lot here that he owns. So you're in a really, really good position. All right, moving on. We're gonna now go south from Orthodox to Orthodox, and talk about the main man, the one who this bookmark is named after, the Alexiad, who is, he's the man, the myth. the strangely clean-shaven legend, Alexio Komnenos. Really, why is he shaved? Every depiction I've ever seen of him has him with an enormous beard. Anyway, so I'm actually not going to go into a ton of detail about him because, here's the spoiler, I'm actually going to be playing as him in an upcoming parallel campaign where I'll be playing as him in Crusader Kings 2, as well as in Medieval 2 Total War. I've already got a lot of it filmed. I think I've got something like over 10 hours of footage already recorded. It's going to be fun. Definitely check those out when they drop, hopefully in the next week or so. So because of that, I'm not going to talk about him too much here, but in brief, he is famous for having restored the Byzantine Empire over his about 40 years as emperor, and this restoration means a few different things. It means that he achieved victories against the Pechenegs, against the Turks, of course, and others. He helped call the First Crusade. He regained territory, but he also restored the empire financially. Now, his descendants in this clan, he has no children at the start, but he'll have many, for the next 100 years, almost exactly 100 years, will rule the empire, and they will continuously restore it and bring it to new heights. And it's basically considered the final peak of the Eastern Roman Empire before it enters into the continuous decline, and it's going to get sacked in 1204. And things like that. So the challenge for you is, can you, and go look up the maps, go look up what he did, can you equally do as good a recovery as Alexios did, and can you prevent your dynasty from falling and eventually bringing an end to the empire? Of course, he's the founder of the Alexios bloodline. Monthly prestige increase, personal combat increase, Greek opinion increase. His reforms stopped the imperial decline, restoring much of the former glory. It's really interesting. This is just sort of an idle thought, but it's drink. I said interesting, but it's kind of fascinating whenever you have discussions of who were considered great rulers of empires through history. Like, are you great because you took them to a great place? Like, is for example, is somebody like Emperor Trajan great because he began with this huge Roman Empire and he made it bigger and better, or is there more credit supposed to be given to maybe a latter-day emperor who is trying to restore something? You get what I'm saying? So, like, is there who is good? What makes somebody great? What makes somebody better? Is it Justinian, who had a pretty good empire to work with, taking back Rome, or is it greater for Alexios to take an empire that's on the verge of destruction and then bring it back to greatness? Just a thought. Anyway, let's look at his main foe, the other main highlighted character for this bookmark, Sultan Suleiman. Again, not going to talk about him a ton here, but he is the only survivor in his family of a failed coup attempt against his cousin Alp Arslan. Alp Arslan had been the head of the Seljuk Sultanate. So his father and all his brothers were killed in that. And because he is a member of the family, he does have the blood of Seljuk, which is giving him more prestige, more combat skill, more opinion from Turks, Persians, and strategists. Started out as an officer in the Khazar army. He later went on to found his own clan, seeking a venture away from his ancestral home. Okay. So he then went west with some men, and he ends up becoming a mercenary for an earlier Byzantine emperor, for Michael the Seventh here. Wait. Yeah, who's now called Despot Michael. Wait a minute. Oh, that's right, he's alive. Oh, that's funny stuff. Anyway, so he was Michael the Seventh there. There was a lot of disputation over who was emperor. And because he helped him, he granted Suleiman land actually right here on the Straits of Bosporus, across from Constantinople, believe it or not. And he eventually took this land, and he was able to establish this Sultanate of Rum that we see here. This Rum would last until the Mongols came in and destroyed it, so in the 1200s. During his lifetime, he defeated Antioch, who we see here to the south. And at the same time, he also was one of the main opponents for the Crusaders as they came west. So can you do the same thing? Take Antioch, fend off the Crusaders, and maybe even take Constantinople, or maybe create a different sort of Rum. the new rum. It's up to you. All right, speaking of Antioch, let's go check this guy out. Actually, no, before we look at Antioch, I want to look at this guy. So this is Duke Ropin of Armenia Minor. So, bit of background. The Armenians had been part of the Byzantine Empire for centuries, meaning as a peoples. They had been immigrating in and were provided with settlements within the Byzantine Empire in return for military service. Now, about 40 years earlier, from where we are now, the Byzantines took the king of Armenia hostage. They forced him to dissolve the kingdom of Armenia, and in return, they said, "Hey, here you go, have a couple lands on the near the sea or whatever." But basically, Armenia was dissolved and turned into part of the Byzantine Empire. So then the Seljuk Turks come in, and they take all of it. They take all this area where Armenia used to be. Anyway, so Rupin here sees an opportunity, and he claims, and everybody believed him, that he was related to the last kings of Armenia. And so he flees into these mountains in southern Anatolia here. So if you look here, it's mountains, hills, mountains. That's what this is. And in 1080, he declares the Kingdom of Armenia Minor. It has a Greek name. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not going to try. So his goal was that he wanted to expand out of these mountains when he could. And so what this could be an interesting gameplay for is if we look over here at de jure kingdoms, perhaps you could attempt to try to... You'll see, you have, even though you're called Armenia Minor, you have no land in de jure Armenia. So perhaps you can try to go over there and reclaim your homeland. Don't worry, there's only a couple of empires standing in your way. So that could be, I think, a really fun campaign. Now, right next door, let's talk about Antioch now. We have Duke Varim of Antioch, who also has a Greek name that I can't pronounce. Another just wild career. He fought for the Byzantine Empire. And he actually fought the Seljuk Turks as they were first encroaching into Anatolia. He was defeated by them before the Battle of Manzikert, and he was actually there at Manzikert during that defeat. Then he declares himself emperor afterwards because the Byzantine Empire was killed, and then there was a power vacuum, and history and nature abhor a vacuum. So he says, "What the hell? I'll be emperor." During the conflicts, he actually was negotiated down for being emperor. It wasn't by Alexios, it was by Nikephoros. But they basically tell Varim, "Tell you what, you can become the Duke of Antioch if you just quit your bullshit with being emperor, okay?" And he says, "That's a deal." However, when Rupin here makes his move and declares himself independent, Varim takes advantage and does the same thing, and actually decides to fight underneath Rupin, because he's also Armenian, as you can see. However, Varim ends up being the one who is achieving most of the victories, and he's the one who's actually helping them expand to the north and the east, and eventually Rupin becomes the vassal of Varim. Eventually, though, this would all be eaten up by a combination of rum and the first Crusaders passing through. So maybe you could try to do the same things, try to defeat Armenia Minor, and then maybe fend off those Crusaders, and Rum especially. And also, don't forget these big-ass Turks. Okay, moving north, we're going to look at the Kingdom of Georgia. Wait, what do you know? Orthodox Christians that are not Russians or Byzantines. How interesting. Now, first thing is, this guy has a very religious bloodline, the blood of Bagrat. This is going to increase your prestige in Armenian opinion and Georgian opinion. One of the oldest Christian dynasties in the world, the children of Bagrat have made Georgia flourish through the centuries. Now, they've had Bagrationi be the one who's the founder, but basically, this dynasty claims that they can trace themselves all the way back to King David of biblical fame, specifically through the bloodline of David to Solomon to Rehoboam, then all the kings of Judah, and so forth. So, you'd think there would just be like a flat Christian opinion boost with this bloodline, but I guess that it kind of makes sense because there'd probably maybe be some people who think it's sacrilegious. But they're using it. They also would use that bloodline not only to say, "Hey, look, we're related to King David," it's also to say that means we're basically Jesus' cousins, so we have a divine right to rule. So anyway, he ended up being defeated by the Seljuk Turks, who were really expanding a lot during this period. He suffered. There was a terrible, terrible earthquake that hurt the country, and the Turks eventually forced him to turn over power to his son, Prince David, with a T. So it's David, I think, is how it's pronounced in Georgian. So I guess your goal, if you're playing as this guy, is to make sure that doesn't happen. One of the things he did historically is he allied himself with the Alans to the north, who are Orthodox but tribal. So we'll see how that goes. Try it out. It's fun. Georgia has expanded a bit at different time periods, so it's doable if you're good enough. All right. Now we're going to leap down past the Holy Land to Caliph al-Mustanasir, who is basically the strongest Shiite Muslim in the world, I think, at this time. He's also... Alright, I'll be... Full disclosure, I haven't 100% verified this, but I haven't found anything to the contrary. He is the longest reigning Muslim ruler of all time. Now, as a Fatimid, the key part of him is that, he has the blood of Abdullah. During the tumultuous years of the Abbasid Caliphate, the Fatimids rolled up in Ifriqiya and established their own caliphate under Abdullah ibn Hussein Fatimid. Now, the reason that this is going to give you prestige, combat skills, Shia opinion, and you periodically can attract Shia great warriors if you are yourself Shia. But the reason why this guy was able to declare himself caliphate is they claimed that they were descended from Fatima, who was the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, blessed be his name. Now, we actually know a pretty decent amount about Caliph al-Mustanasir because of the work of a historian called al-Makrezi, who was an Egyptian historian underneath the Mamluks, who would eventually replace the Fatimids, but he was very fascinated with the Fatimid dynasty, and so he wrote quite a lot about him. So this guy, he has no parent here, but he was the son of a Nubian slave, and he actually was originally made caliph when he was only 6 years old. So he's already been caliph for about 45 years by the time we're in the 1081 start. Of course, because he was only 6, it was originally his mother who was running the country, so it was actually a slave in charge. Now, he dealt with so many issues during his reign. There was open civil war in the streets of Cairo between the Nubians and the Turks. There was a famine that ravaged the country. It was so bad that even his own bodyguards were sometimes starving to death. Syria was lost to the Turks during his reign. And basically, and he was not the only one, eventually he becomes just a de facto ruler. Or I should say not de facto ruler. He's basically a puppet ruler, and it's his viziers who are trying to actually, get the country on the right track. I could talk more about detail about them in some other things in another video, but basically, one of the things that was sort of interesting is a lot of his viziers were Armenian, and remember, this is during his reign, this is when Armenia is destroyed, and so a lot of immigration to Egypt by Armenians is encouraged during this time, and they actually end up kind of bracing the dynasty and keeping it from capitulating in a kind of interesting way. Also, he sent some of the first Ismaili Islamic missionaries to India to begin converting people. All right, yeah, and if you just look at you got the Metaphysites, who of course the Armenians are quite Metaphysites. Everything's just really mixed up here with the Egyptian Coptics, Levantines, Nubians. It's a mess. It's a total mess. Try to keep it together. Now, speaking of missionaries to India, let's come down here to the Sultanate, Sultanate, who is being run by a woman at the moment. So, Sultanate Arwa is the final ruler of what was the Sulayhid dynasty. Her reign began in 1067 when her husband came to the throne. You'll notice here, though, that he is incapable. He was, in fact, paralyzed due to a wound that he suffered during a war. So he puts her in charge. And Ottawa is famous for several things. You'll actually look here. She has a bloodline, increasing her Bedouin opinion and piety. Powerful woman known for intelligence and knowledge of both heavenly and earthly affairs. She also engaged in several building projects across Yemen. And she wasn't too bad to look at either. But seriously, if you look here, she is a mastermind theologian, genius, poet, Hafiz. She's completely memorized the Quran. In fact, she was given a title. I actually don't remember the name of that title right now, but it basically, like, literally translates to proof of God, in the sense that she was just so great and she was so religious and pious that it's like it was proof of God's existence, essentially. But it was a very nice title to have. She's humble, cynical, kind, and ambitious. Yeah, so yeah, she founds the bloodline. She also was a patron of the construction of many mosques, also a palace, which I believe right now is being considered. I think her palace in Yemen is being considered to be a like they're working on having it made into a World Historical Site. She also sent a lot of Islamic missionaries to Western India, and in fact financed the creation of many communities there. So if you maybe wanted to go for the Great Indian Sultanate achievement, this could be an interesting way to start it. And you also have an heir who is of your dynasty already set, as well as, siblings, so you're good to go there. It's not going to be a one and done kind of thing, just because, like, you're a Muslim woman. So, she also was very influential in the Shia world, and in fact, when Caliph al-Mustanir would die, she basically acted as kingmaker because her voice was so influential among the Shia community that she chose the third son, Prince al-Mustali, to be the next caliph, passing over the first two sons. Now, from sultan to sultan, let's look at the big guy. Sultan Malik Shah of the Seljuk Sultanate. Obviously the major player in the region. He's right in the middle of his reign right now. His father was Alp Arslan, who was the one who defeated the Byzantines at Manzikert. Now, he died a little bit after that when he began a campaign, Alp Arslan that is, against the Karakhanid here in Central Asia. And it was during this fighting that Alp Arslan was mortally wounded, and then Malik Shah became his heir. However, he had an uncle who attempted to become sultan, who he had to fight. He ended up killing his uncle as well as a couple of his uncle's kids, and specifically he killed his uncle by strangling him with a bowstring after capturing him in the decisive battle. Now, that was like 8 years prior to this, and during his reign he would end up waging several wars. He would push back the Karakhanid, he would push back the Ghaznavid, and then made a marriage alliance with them. He also went into the Caucasus and northern Iran and took a lot of these areas here. Now, Malik Shah is mostly known for his conquests because he did make an absolutely enormous Turkish Empire at its peak. But he also was a patron of education. So this is an example I really like. He established the Isfahan Observatory, and he said, I'm going to fund you guys for 30 years. The only thing you guys got to do is observe the stars. And even though he died before that time was over, in the time that they were able to just observe full time, they were able to calculate a new solar calendar that had a margin of error of only 1 day off every 5,000 years. As I was saying, though, Malik Shah ended up dying before he could fund them for the full 30 years, so they lost their patron. But that created a precedent for royal patronage of scientific endeavors, is basically what I'm saying. Now, after he died, the empire just goes into total chaos because there's successor states, and then also the Crusaders start coming in. So, these are the kind of things, these are some of the reasons why the Crusaders were able to take Jerusalem, because the Seljuks had exploded. So you kind of need that on your side if you're a Crusader in the game. Also, he is of the blood of Seljuk as well. Alright, let's actually just talk for a little bit about Sultan Ibrahim of the Ghaznavid. Ghaznavid Sultanate. Pretty old here, 59 years old. Kind of the most interesting thing about him is that he's the blood of Sabuk Tigna, which is going to give you more prestige, Turkish opinion, Afghan opinion, plus 10, not just plus 5, it's plus 10 for the Afghans, and a plus 5 combat skill. Founder of the Ghaznavid dynasty. In his youth, he lived as a slave, but in later life came to rule a mighty kingdom which expanded far towards India. Now, his father and his siblings, Ibrahim that is, his father and his siblings, as well as his grandfather, had all been sultan at some point, and they're all dead. Very sad stuff. He's the last surviving male of the dynasty when he was crowned. Of course, now he does have an heir. You know, he's got a son here, the Prince of Kabulistan. So you've got at least that going for you. He mostly kept the peace with the Seljuks, probably because they kicked his shit in. And after that, he formed that marriage alliance. And then he mostly focused on going down into India. So this could be another great Indian Sultanate achievement run. You may want to play as them. He is a Sunni. Although if you want something a little harder, down here, the Maharaj Dodo, who's a Sindhi Shia, he's a Shiite. And you also have over here Amir of the Karmati Raj. So these are just a couple of Shias, you know, surrounded by Sunnis and other things. All right. Now let's go into India. Now, I just want to throw out there that I think that if Paradox, because it's my understanding that India is like one of the rarest played areas of the map, and I think one of the things that Paradox could do, not that I'm a huge fan of Wikipedia, is they probably should put in some Wikipedia links over here, because they seem to stop like at the Aral Sea, even if it's like a relatively well-known historical figure, they won't have a link. Again, I'm not saying Wikipedia is the end-all be-all, far from it, but I think if you can set it up so your players could learn more about these areas, people would play them more. Anyway, so we are going to go into the Chola, which is one of the longest running empires in world history. Unfortunately, most of their empire that they built was off the map over here, going down into Southeast Asia. But hey, you know what? Just make a new one to the west whenever you play the Chola. That's what I say, and then you lean. And then you lean like one. But seriously, all right, so Maharaja Kolotunka of the, specifically of the Chalukya Chola, because there was another. Basically, this was a cadet branch that had ended up taking control of the empire. This is at a period when it has been in decline, and there have been repeated wars against the Chalukya over the border here. Now, these wars had gone on for decades, centuries, really. But usually the Chola would win. But lately, because of part of the decline, the Chalukya are winning. So they're really on their back foot here in 1081. Now, during this time, the Chalukya end up invading Chola because the Chola were entering into a union with the Vengi kingdom of southern India, and it's basically, think of it like the War of Spanish Succession. The Chalukya were worried because if these two kingdoms fused, then they'd have a very powerful foe they would have to deal with. Kolotunka ends up defeating the Chalukya in that war, and then he maintains peace with them for 50 whole years, which is really impressive. It's like the Yankees and Red Sox having a truce or something, right? He then spends the rest of his reign securing the south, and he also moves up the coast pretty far north, almost getting up into modern-day Bangladesh. So if you want to sort of restore an empire, this is the way to do it. You know, one that's been in decline. Basically, you can think of him as the Indian Alexios in some ways. Over here, we've got Raj Sankaradavev IV of Nepal. He is considered to be the finest ruler of the Thakuri dynasty that ruled Nepal for a while. And if you look at the religious map, you will see he is an island of Hindu in a sea of Buddhists, and he basically spent his reign fighting off attacks by Buddhists. Because, you know, he didn't have a friend in the world, basically. So there you go. If you want a tough Hindu start, that might be the way to go. We also have over here Maharaj Rampala of the Pala Kingdom. He's interesting because he's the only another fallen empire, so to speak. He is the final and only living descendant of Gopala Pala, founder of the Pala dynasty, said to be descended from the mythical Survayan Shah Sun dynasty. He came to rule a massive kingdom encompassing all of Bengal. So this will give you more prestige and higher Indo-Aryan opinion. So, now the name Pala means protector because Gopala had gotten that name because he basically had united a chaotic Bengal that had been, there was just this period of anarchy that he had ended up winning out and ruling over it. There's mixed accounts as to why. But so as the last descendant of Gopala, because you'll see when you start the game, you do not have a dynastic heir. If you get assassinated a month into the game, it's over. The line dies out. So try to avoid that, would you? And there you have it. There are a couple of other interesting people you can go after. So, for example, if you go over here with Gailapo Porgal Chechen Alexiad of Guge, he is a descendant of Songstin Gampo, who is the founder of the Tibetan Empire. There's another one over here in Mariul. They could be good. This blood will give you additional prestige. Bopta opinion, you get sky burials. And then this is particularly interesting. Increased cultural conversion speed to Bodpa from Jiangzhun and Sumpa. So I would recommend maybe those two if you want to go for the Tibetan Empire. And try to form that before the Mongols show up, because historically this was during a centuries-long period of fraction that had happened after the Tibetan Empire fell, and the Mongol Empire, of course, will just come and sweep in. But try to form the empire and hold them off. And then finally, I forgot to talk about this guy, Kagan Adam of Bulgar, member of the Dulo family, another one who has the blood of Attila. This is actually more of a direct descent from the Dulo that will go on, and these of course will go on to, some of them will immigrate as far, they'll migrate as far as Italy, but this will eventually form into Bulgaria as they come west. So hence why you get the higher Bulgar and Bulgarian opinion. And they are nomadic Sunni, so that's kind of interesting. I think that's more than enough. Geez, we passed the hour 15 mark. Those are some interesting historical characters in Crusader Kings 2 at the Alexiad bookmark. Specifically rulers. Again, I just want to reiterate, first off, thanks for watching this far. I'm glad you enjoyed it. But let me know if you want me to maybe go through this bookmark again, but pick up instead vassals. So I could talk about High Chief David of the Razan, or Bailier Chakan in Rum, or Hugh the Devil, or Roger the Great in Iberia, and just different things like that. I'd be more than happy to go over interesting vassals if you want to be somebody who you want to start as a king, or you're just an underling and then work your way up to becoming ruler. Also, please give me constructive criticism over how I can make future videos like this better. I'm going to, obviously there's the 1066 start, the Charlemagne start, Age of Vikings start, 1337, and so on and so forth. I'd love to do all of them one day. So please tell me how I can do it better. Thanks once again for joining me. I'm Conquering History Games. I'm going to get some water. You have yourselves a wonderful day, and be sure to subscribe and click the bell so you're always notified whenever a new video like this one is up on the channel, so you can learn about new, interesting characters to play in Crusader Kings 2. Had to throw you that last interesting so you can finish your drink. Have a great one. Goodbye.